There are some amazingly affordable places around the world to buy real estate, either as your first or second or third home, or as an investment. And today we're going to talk about 5 places in countries you may not have considered where you can buy real estate at incredible bargains. I've been thinking a lot about the next frontier markets that I'm looking at more from an investment perspective. I've spent many years talking to you about places like Cambodia from that perspective. I'm looking at Nepal. I'm looking at Bangladesh. That's not what we're going to talk about today. If you want us to talk about frontier markets purely for investment, leave a comment below. But we're going to talk about places where you could actually live. Live on a beach. Live somewhere affordable. Live somewhere and potentially even get a second passport. This is a list of 5 affordable places to buy property abroad. It's by Kathleen Peddicord, who is well known for her expertise in helping particularly Americans retire overseas. She will be a speaker at Nomad Capitalist Live later this year, our annual live event. Here are her choices. I'll give my thoughts as we go. Which one do you like the best, or is there one that's missing? Leave a comment and tell us. The first choice on her list, and she's comparing all these for savings relative to the average U.S. market. These are 1,000 square foot, it's about 92 square meter homes. She's saying in the United States that home would be about $221,000 on average. That seems like a pretty affordable home compared to what you see in the U.S. in a lot of places, but that's the average for a small home. Here's what you get. Her first market, and I've seen her talk about this more, is Northern Cyprus. So you got the Republic of Cyprus, the Greek-speaking Republic of Cyprus, European Union member. They claim the entire island in the Mediterranean. But you have the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus that is claimed and is recognized only by Turkey, where they've got this northern, give or take, a third of the island. And she says it's 47% cheaper to the U.S. market. Now, no doubt, there are people who have some concerns about this. There are people who say this is wrong. There are people who say you don't have legal protections there. But she's looked at this and said Northern Cyprus is a de facto state on the island of Cyprus, island nation in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, known for its long sandy shores, abundant sunshine, excellent cuisine, friendly locals. She says the historic tensions between the north and south of Cyprus have meant that until recently, tourism and development have been focused on the south. Today, relations are more relaxed and it's business as usual on both sides of the border. I've been to Cyprus. I've crossed over into Northern Cyprus. Is there a different feeling? You'll have to go and be the judge for yourself. But certainly there are people saying incredible property deals, 47% less, $118 per foot. That's barely $1,000 a meter, which is my standard, even after this inflationary era, for incredibly cheap property. So you see stuff for $100,000, you can buy a property with views. Do you believe that some people say, hey, it's a bit unstable? That's a decision that you can make. But she says real estate in Northern Cyprus remains fantastically affordable. The best deals are in pre-construction developments. That may be true there. I often stay away from pre-construction, but they are doing some building up there. And she says you can buy for even less than that per square foot price. And she says there's a tourist boom. I have seen people talking about this tourist boom in Northern Cyprus. You can be the judge of that, but definitely there's more talk about it. She talks about Brazil. 38% savings compared to the U.S. market. Here's the thing about Brazil. We talk a lot about smaller countries. There aren't as many places to go. So Nomad Capitalist Live is in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia. Where else is there in Malaysia? Penang, people go and live there. Langkawi, people go there primarily on a holiday. Malacca, I suppose a few people live there. Johor Bahru, not as many foreigners live there. And those are primarily the cities. So, compare that to even like a country like Georgia we talk about. There's probably pretty much one city you got to live in, the capital. But when you go to Brazil, very different story. Brazil is huge. People talk about going to Florianopolis. I think generally people like to go to the southern part. That is more developed. They say places like Florianopolis are more safe. What she's talking about is places that are in the north, the more undiscovered parts of Brazil. So she's talked for years about Fortaleza, further up north. And she says 38% cheaper. You can get a beautiful 1,000 square foot apartment for an average $138,000. There's land for sale. There's a lot of stuff down there. She says Brazil is a global powerhouse with one of the strongest, most diversified economies in the world. And because it's largely self-sufficient, it's well insulated from global crises. And so it's also the 5th biggest country in the world with 4,500 miles of coastline. It's a lot of coastline. pristine beaches, the Amazon rainforest, rich cultures, World Heritage sites, and more. She talks about buying there for beachfront property. What's interesting is if you're willing to live in Brazil, which from a tax perspective is not so great, but if you're willing to live in Brazil, you can get an immigration permit, a residence permit, by buying real estate, and you can get citizenship relatively quickly. I think Brazilian citizenship is one of the most interesting. If you want to actually put time into the ground, again, it's going to cost. If you have a high income, it's going to cost you. But I mean, who has a beef with the Brazilians? Brazilian. I mean, anyone can look Brazilian. It is a very diverse country, and so if you're looking for a place where, hey, I could be from Brazil, I know people who have Brazilian citizenship. I mean, anyone can be Brazilian, and so. If you give birth to a child on Brazilian soil, they are Brazilian, and you can split that citizenship to as little as 1 year. So if you're a younger couple, this could be a place to buy something. I think Brazil is interesting. I get that they have some problems, as any country does. But from a kind of a geopolitical point of view, passport point of view, I think it's actually an interesting place. And so she's a fan of some of these places up in northern Brazil. Other people say for lifestyle, maybe not as much for return. Florianopolis and places in the south are interesting. Colombia, a country where I have a home, she says 34% rather, cheaper than the U.S. market. And by the way, here's what you want to keep in mind. People will sometimes say, oh, I thought it would be cheaper. Had an instance of this recently. Person came to Kuala Lumpur. They're looking around KLCC. This is the prime city center. And then they're comparing it to almost an ex-urban environment where they would live in their country. I've talked about friends that I have that live in, Mesa, Arizona, or they live in, Naperville, Illinois. I mean, the Naperville, Illinois of Bogota is not going to be that much cheaper than Naperville, Illinois. And yet you can't say, hey, I'm going to live in Secaucus, New Jersey, but I want to move overseas and live in the Upper East Side, and why doesn't it cost that much less? I mean, in some countries, in very frontier countries, some of the best real estate might cost almost as much as you'd pay in the Upper East Side on a per foot basis because, if it's not a safe place, people are going to pay a premium if they're wealthy to be safe. And so, when we talk about places like Colombia, we're talking about living in fantastic locations with great shopping, great restaurants. You're in basically where I am, whether it's the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side, Fifth Avenue, whatever you want to call it, that's where I would buy. And so, I mean, if you want to live further out, you're going to save a heck of a lot more than 34%. But if you're going to live in the best places, you're going to save more. Cost of living is less, and not in Brazil or Colombia. But in some of these places you could go, you're going to dramatically reduce your taxes as well. And so you're going to save money. But real estate owned by wealthy people, there are wealthy people everywhere, and they're not paying pennies. We just did a real estate tour in Bogota. There's plenty of apartments for $1 million. They may not move as fast, but they are there. On Colombia, she says, her focus on Medellin. I'm in Bogota. A lot of the expats like to go to Medellin, the eternal spring, they call it, compared to Bogota's eternal fall. Following years of steady price increases, housing markets are decelerating in Colombia's major cities. Perhaps it's because of the new president. You do see some people who are leaving the country. My perspective is, Doug Casey's, I'm just the foreigner. They incentivize foreigners bringing in money because they still know, even places like Nicaragua, they know, we need some money. I kind of think the days of a lot of these countries just being like, we don't need money. I think there's been a change this century against that. And so if I don't live in Colombia full-time, I'm not in the Colombian tax net. I'm just a guy who owns an apartment, and I come and go as a resident. And so, yes, I think my property there is still up, but it was up more in the past. By the way, I'm not buying property entirely just to make money. I'm buying property for the lifestyle, for the optionality. During the pandemic, Colombia, when I went there in 2021, was more open than other places that I lived. They were kind of coming off some of the stuff from the pandemic. So if I lose a few bucks here and there, if it goes up, 10% and then it goes down and now I'm up 5%, I don't worry that much about that. I don't worry that much about, little currency swings. What I'm looking for is having assets diversified across the world, what that does for me financially and what that does for me in terms of optionality. So she says, real estate in Colombia is hard to beat. Prices have come down. Yields are decent now in Colombia. Medellin is one of the most in-demand cities in the country, commanding strong tourism numbers, offering perfect weather, attractive surroundings, and a sophisticated cosmopolitan lifestyle. Forward-thinking and innovative, and they have done a couple good infrastructure things recently. It continues to win awards in areas like urban design and sustainable development. She also talks about Santa Marta on the Caribbean coast instead of the famed Cartagena. Yeah, all my Colombia, they all hate Cartagena, where property prices and cost of living are inflated. So Santa Marta for the coast, Medellin if you want the eternal spring. Cali is a little bit cheaper if you want the eternal summer. There's something about Cali. Jeremy, our event organizer of a decade, lives down there, and I went to see Jeremy. And it doesn't quite have it for some reason, but he lives out there, and it's beautiful out there. But in the city center, I'm not feeling Cali. That's hot. It's hot down there. So she talks about Colombia. Currency can accentuate savings for U.S. dollar holders as the peso remains weak, although it's not as weak as it used to be. The Malaysian ringgit has been one of the weakest currencies in the last year. The Colombian peso bounced off some all-time lows. It's up about 25% since the all-time lows. I just sent some money down there. Every time I send money, it's the worst rate. Anyway, Montenegro is her next choice. 32% savings relative to the U.S. market. I will tell you, Montenegro is not cheap for a couple of reasons. Much like we've talked about Cambodia in Asia, which is essentially a dollarized country, Panama in Latin America, which is dollarized, Montenegro not being technically part of the Eurozone, but de facto part of the Eurozone because they use the euro. I think that euro, or I think the dollar, that does not help. I mean, if you look at Serbia next door, you have things are cheaper. Montenegro is not a cheap place. You go to the grocery store, it is not cheap. Quite frankly, I was talking to Anka, the real estate maestro from Montenegro, and I was showing her prices from grocery stores in places like Ireland, and she's like, that's half the price of what you'd pay in Montenegro. It is not a cheap place to live, especially if you're not from there. Now, you do have some great fresh fish at Montefish. You have nice stuff. And by the way, housing can be affordable, but I mean, land is very expensive. Ask me how I know. It is not this incredibly cheap place. Now, is it cheaper than what you get? You have the beautiful port of Montenegro. They've made it into a beautiful yacht club. They have tons of restaurants now. They've really, expanded that. It's really becoming kind of an urban center along the water. Great for yachters to fuel up. So you have kind of a culture within certain regions. They have other places like Lusaka, and there's other different places you can go now. It's developing, but some of those nicer places are not cheap. You can buy stuff kind of cheap. She's saying $151 per square foot, 1,000 square foot apartment. So that's, again, 90 meters, $151,000. You're not on the water for that price or close to the water. You're certainly not in a yacht club, and you're not nearby. You're going out maybe where I'm at in Kotor Bay. You're going out into kind of the far-flung areas of the bay where it's further out, Maureen or something. Maybe in parts of suburban Budva. Certainly once you get up into the hills, you can get down to that price. But Montenegro is not cheap. She says it's a tiny country in Southeast Europe, long coastline around the Adriatic Sea. I do love sitting out in the balcony in the summer, just watching the cruise ships go off into the sunset, watching the beautiful bay. Arguably the most beautiful water in the Mediterranean that also laps the shores of Bari, Italy. You're right there. Although not a household name in the United States yet, people in the know have been buying property in Montenegro for some time, particularly the ultra-wealthy. Billionaire developers have built luxury marinas where the 1% moor their super yachts. And because of the tax incentives there, it's good. Prices have gone up. It's a little bit crazy. I feel like it's plateauing a little bit, but prices have gone up in Montenegro. There's talk of how Montenegro might join the European Union. Their citizenship program is now gone. If you're Vitalik Buterin, they'll give you Montenegrin citizenship. So maybe if you bring Ethereum events to Montenegro or build a super yacht marina, they'll give it to you. Yeah, definitely not a cheap place. But can you get value compared to living somewhere in the U.S. or Saint-Tropez or something? Yeah, absolutely. Greece, 23% cheaper. I would argue Greece is perhaps a better value than Montenegro these days. It values the gold. And when you look at the quality of the properties, I've told you how I'm looking to exit Montenegro, not because I don't like it. I do love the yacht club and all the restaurants, and the Regent Hotel is beautiful. But I think Greece does have more ready to move. I'm actually going to a Greek villa that I'm renting in the next couple of weeks. She mentions Chania, $171 per square foot. That's the area in Greece that she likes, Chania. says the property market is red hot. Parts of it have been influenced by the Greek Golden Visa program. They've recently increased the price to kind of push out buyers from the hottest areas. She said it recorded the biggest year-on-year house price increase in 20 years during the first half of 2023, fueled by economic growth and an increase in foreign market because this Golden Visa program was, and in some cases still is, one of the cheaper ones in the European Union. Athens commands the highest prices at $214 a foot. I would argue that the Mykonos and Santorini's do. 6,000 islands, coastline of 10,500 miles collectively. Her top choices are Corfu, where I will be, and Crete, where I was. Lunda is a cute village in Crete. Both islands are big enough to offer a range of property types and prices. Yeah, you don't want to be on one of these teeny tiny islands, I don't think. Chania in Crete stands out for a colorful historic center that's full of trendy shops, restaurants, and cafes. I think Greece, Portugal housing prices have gone crazy, in part thanks to the Golden Visa and a lot of people moving there. Spain and Greece have not seen the resurgence. I mean, they've seen some increases, but they're not really back in many areas to where they were. There are some values. I would not buy property in Spain with all the squatters issues. Certainly not to be there part-time. Greece now has tax incentives for foreigners. Greece, I get there's certainly a level of bureaucracy, but immigration incentives, tax incentives, I think for a place to park some money. I think citizenship is harder to get there. Same in Montenegro, by the way. I don't think either country's in a rush to naturalize anybody. But if I had to choose, out of all these, I think Greece perhaps stands out to me. I'm not saying I want to move and deal with Greek bureaucracy full time, but I do think that the properties have not gone up in value as much. Now, obviously, Turkey can create the next place along the water, or Albania can step up its game. I mean, Corfu is very close to Saranda, Albania, which we've talked about as being incredibly cheap property. Could they build a yacht club? I believe they are. I think Vlora, where I was in 2019, has really kind of developed since I've been there in central Albania on the coast. I mean, a lot of places can create coast, but Greece does have sort of a brand name. I'm often opposed to buying into brand names, and I'm not in a rush to buy in Greece, but I think that there's maybe some interest there as a place that they do have the tax incentives that you could go there and live full-time if you had to. And that might be interesting to me. So those are Kathleen Peddicord's top 5 choices. You'll hear from her at Nomad Capitalist Live later this year. For me, from an investment point of view, I'm looking at frontier markets. And if you want to hear more about those, leave a comment below.